Will the Utah Utes defense shut down Lincoln Riley, Caleb Williams, and the USC offense? We're talking about it on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We're available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Prize Picks. You can go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you guys like and subscribe. We'd love to interact with you guys in the YouTube comments or on social media as well. You can follow our show at Locked On Utes, and my personal handle is at JT Wistrcill. On today's show, we're going to be talking about Coach Whitt's latest comments. Whitt's translator will be making its return once again this week. At the end, we'll talk about the once again, just really disappointing outcome of the targeting call that was not overturned. Coach Whitt revealed to us and what that means for Utah against USC. Talk about Cole Bishop missing the first half. But first, just want to talk about how I think this Utah defense is going to do against this high-powered USC offense. And say, can Utah shut down USC? The answer to that is yes, they can. They are capable of it. They are more capable of it, in my opinion, than Notre Dame was. And yes, Notre Dame playing at home, all that gives them a boost. But this is a Utah defense, which, as Porter Larson of ESPN 700 posted on his Twitter feed, they average giving up 12.17 points. That's fifth best in the FBS. Their 68 rushing yards allowed is first in the FBS. Their 277.8 yards allowed is ninth in the FBS. Their 22 sacks is good for fifth in the FBS. I mean, 2 defensive touchdowns, 76% on third down, red zone stops, 7% are seventh in FBS. Once again, it's all courtesy of Porter Larson. You guys can find those. He posted those on his social media feed of ESPN 700, Porter Larson. But yeah, just this Utah defense is one of the premier defenses in college football, and they've played legitimate teams. They haven't played a Michigan level schedule. When you look, they've gone down to Waco. They took on Florida. They've taken on UCLA. They took on Oregon State, and they lost the Oregon State game, but only allowing 21 points in a top 20 team's house is still a win for this Utah defense. And we saw them dismantle the Cal Bears this past week. So this Utah defense is absolutely capable of giving the USC offense fits. In fact, we saw them do it just last season. Remember, Utah gave up 28 points in the first half against USC in that thrilling game in October inside Rice-Eccles Stadium. But in the second half, Utah only allowed 7 points in the third quarter and in the fourth quarter. So really rounded into form there, started to figure out what they wanted to do pressure-wise, coverage-wise, all of that. And it carried over into the Pac-12 championship game where Utah held USC to just 24 points in that one. And really, USC wasn't able to get anything going outside of the first quarter where they started hot. Caleb Williams got hurt. That definitely played a factor. But the second and third quarters, their offense really didn't do anything against Utah. So Morgan Scalley, if there's any defensive coordinator you want to try and contain Caleb Williams, Morgan Scalley would be the pick for that. His defensive track record and the success he's had against the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, against arguably the best offensive mind in college football, speaks for itself. And you would definitely want him to be the guy out there. When I watched the Notre Dame game back, the thing I really noticed that I can talk about what Utah did last year. I can talk about Morgan Scalley and some of those things. But when you just turn on the tape and watch what happened to them against Notre Dame, and I've watched a lot of USC this season, I'm like what Coach Whitt had a quote on what he thinks of Caleb Williams. He called him arguably one of the most talented quarterbacks they've ever faced during my time at Utah. That's what Coach Whitt said about Caleb Williams. I agree with that statement. You guys know who watched the show. I'm a big fan of Caleb Williams. I think he's tremendously talented. But just like any quarterback, when he is under duress from multiple angles, he's prone to throw the ball away. And I shouldn't just say throw the ball, give the ball away is the correct term, because he turned it over a lot last week. He actually could have even turned it over more. There was one pass in particular that bounced right off a linebacker's hand. So yeah, Caleb played his worst game he's played as a starting quarterback. And I don't put the blame for Caleb's poor performance as much on Caleb as I actually do on the USC offensive line, because the amount of times Caleb was pressured was alarming. USC in general, USC's offense, their biggest issue right now is not play calling. It's not players getting open. It's their inability to run the ball. I mean, multiple instances of 3rd and short in that game, and you're getting blown off the ball by the Irish. I'm not talking about like, oh, he lunged. Is it close? He got it. I'm talking about tackles for loss, 1 or 2 yards on 3rd and 1. Like, got to have it here. You need your offensive line to get a push. There was a USC's right tackle in particular did not play very well. I'm curious to see how he's going to perform against a Utah pass rush that, as we said, ranks top 5 in sacks with way Van Fillinger, Connor O'Toole, and obviously Jonah Elliss, who has 9 sacks already this season, really heating up. That's something I think Utah can exploit. There was just a number of things where you just have like mistakes by the USC offensive line that really cost them. And we mentioned Caleb throwing under duress. Just did not work out well. He made a number of poor decisions to throw it. His first interception, linebacker in his face, just needed to loft the ball up and overthrew it completely. His tight end who was open in the middle of the field, safety picks it off. Then if you look to his some of his other interceptions, just totally trying to force passes, like the one inside his own like 15, I think it was. He tries to force it into ends up being kind of double coverage with the linebacker in the corner there too. It was 1st and 10. You easily could have thrown it down to your other receiver in the flat, and he would have gotten some yak because there was no one immediately on top of him. So you didn't need to force him make a play there. Then the very next drive, drifting to the left down the sideline, just totally forgets about one of the corners and just throws it up there. It's uncharacteristic Caleb Williams mistakes. And I don't expect him to play that poorly again in terms of throwing the ball away. But I can't see this USC offense struggling because Utah can get pressure on Caleb Williams. They did last year. Morgan Scalley does a great job drawing up blitzes. Utah is very athletic linebackers, where you're talking about Alander Barton, Leavani Demooney, Karene Reed. Nate Ritchie might come. He got a sack last week because he's going to be stepping in for Cole Bishop. Sione Vaki is speedy too. There's corner blitzes, safety blitzes. Utah is going to be bringing all kinds of heat, and it's not going to be easy for the USC offensive line to pick it up because, number one, they struggle at it, and number two, any team, I think, struggles to contain this Utah defensive line because of the players they have that can win one-on-one and just the multiple sides, angles. There's just so much stuff they throw at you. It makes it very challenging. USC's receivers are very good, and Utah is going to have to do a good job tackling in space, and they also have to do a good job. This is where if Utah doesn't get home and Caleb Williams can buy the time that he has in the past, that's where I worry about Utah's defensive backs holding up because just like last year, it's just hard to cover for more than 5 seconds, and that's where you can get defensive holdings and all those things. This is the best group of receivers, the most potent offense Utah has played yet, and they're in for a physical battle. Utah will be able to stop the run. USC, whether it's their running backs, they're just okay, or the offensive line is not great at run blocking. So Utah should be able to control the line of scrimmage in a lot of ways. And then it'll just be, can you get pressure and bring Caleb Williams down or force him to make those mistakes? Because he is one of the most elusive quarterbacks in college football. He had a run against Notre Dame where he was dead to rights, and he's probably the only quarterback in college football who could have gotten out of it and made a play as he did in that instance. But Utah has to tackle in space, have to stick in coverage, and you got to stay disciplined to some of the reverses and stuffs that if Utah, the backside defensive end for Utah drifts a little too far downfield instead of kind of staying upfield and waiting to see if that reverse comes, that's where Utah could really get themselves in trouble. So it's going to be a fun matchup. This is best on best. USC, one of the best offenses in college football. Utah, one of the best defenses in college football. Utah is capable of shutting down Lincoln Riley and the USC offense. Will they be able to do it? I think they're going to have success. I think it's going to be a back and forth kind of game, and I'm excited to see how it's going to play out. And we're going to continue to talk about this matchup this week on Locked On Utes. But as of right now, I do think there's a really good chance we're walking away from this game saying, wow, the Utah defense got the best of the USC offense. And that could absolutely turn into a clip where that gets clipped and posted somewhere and looks really bad after the game because it is Caleb Williams, it is Lincoln Riley, a very talented group they got. But could also end up being correct because of the talent on this Utah defense, and they have had USC's number recently. So that on tomorrow's show, we'll be breaking down how I think the Utah offense will do against the USC defense. And once again, we'll continue this conversation of like Caleb Williams and the offense versus defense all week long on Locked On Utes. But first, coming up after we tell you guys about one of our great sponsors, I do want to talk about what Kyle Whittingham not just said about Bryson Barnes, but also just play a little wit translator, as I like to do, kind of interpret what I think Kyle Whittingham is trying to say in his latest batch of media quotes. That will be we will be diving into that in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. You guys can head over and add your job to the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. They have simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's one of the many reasons that small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's all caps, no spaces, Locked On College. To post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Also want to remind you guys that each Friday you can check out College Football Kickoff Live. And each Friday it will go live on every Locked On College YouTube channel, of course, including Locked On Utes. They go live at 11 a.m. Eastern on every channel, as I mentioned, and they dive into the biggest playoff implications as that's starting to ramp up, the biggest matchup storylines in the sport that we all love so much. And it has insight and analysis from the stable of Locked On College hosts covering their teams every day. You guys can find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. Alrighty, coming back in this one, let's play a little bit of Whitt's Translator. This is where I talk about some of the recent quotes by Kyle Whittingham to the media and give my best interpretation of what I think he means by them. Let's start out with first what he talked about with Bryson Barnes. He said Bryson was a little inaccurate going into the Cal game, and he played well against Cal. And he's right. That's the reason Bryson lost the job against Baylor, right? Like, he was really inaccurate, just struggled with pressure. That was a big issue. And he was asked by Josh Furlong, I believe it was, what he needs to see more out of Bryson. And he talked about that he just needs to be more Bryson needs to be more confident in his ability to get chunk yardage down the field. And that's where it's surprising, right, to hear Kyle Whittingham talk about his backup quarterback being more aggressive. A guy he also literally in the same sentence said Bryson does a good job managing the game. So you're also calling him a game manager while saying that you want him to take more shots. And I do agree with Whitt, though, in this regard. They should take more shots because they're going to be there at times, whether it's Munir McClain, whether it was Money Parks. I think Devon Bailey is a guy who can make those big grabs, too. I hope Emory Simmons still seems like a guy who's going to make a big play for this Utah team at some point this season. And we know Thomas Yasmin, with his athleticism at the tight end spot, is capable of making special plays as well. So I do want to see Bryson aired out a little bit more. I hope Utah gives him good protection and time, kind of like they did the first play of the season when they dropped the bomb into Money Parks. But I just really hope that we see this Utah team begin to air it out a little bit more. And Bryson has shown the ability to make those big throws. Every game he's pretty much started outside of the Baylor one, he's had one of those massive throws and massive plays. So just continue to let him operate. And I think there's a chance he could make 2 or 3 of those big throws against the USC defense that, while playing well recently, has still had their struggles. And I do think Utah, if they play this correctly, just like last season when USC into their matchup with Utah led the nation in sacks, Utah held them without a sack. Utah, I think, will be able to hold up against the offensive front of USC, and we will be talking about that more on tomorrow's show. But I like that Coach Whitt was saying that Bryson needs to be a little bit more aggressive. One thing that was interesting was Coach Whitt got a little bit defensive of his defensive backs because he was asked about how he feels they're going to hold up against now that the schedule is starting to ramp up a little bit. And Whitt defended them, saying that they do lead the Pac-12 in pass efficiency defense. And I understand what he's doing, hype him up as guys protecting him. And the Utah defensive backs have been very good. If you're nitpicking this defense, that is where you start, though. They have allowed a couple of big pass plays at moments throughout the season. But I also thought that it was a little bit funny for him to dismiss the question as much as he tried to do while still saying like they've been good because, look, at times this season, while it is a nitpick, your defensive backs have gotten beat. And yes, you are the #1 team in the Pac-12 in pass efficiency defense. Utah has not played any of the tough quarterbacks in the Pac-12. The Pac-12 arguably has 4 of the top 5 quarterbacks in college football. And I'm not talking about draft rankings. I'm just talking about straight up. And Utah's about to start playing them. Caleb Williams is the best. Michael Penix might be the second best. Bo Nix is arguably the third best. And Shedeur Sanders could even arguably be the 4th best. All those guys belong in the top 10 guaranteed. And I can make a case for them all to be in the top 5. All of them are coming up on Utah's schedule. And that's not even mentioning a guy like Fifita for Arizona, who's really started to heat up. This will be the toughest test for the Utah defense is all coming up. I have no doubts that the front 7 is going to hang in with the best of the best. But there has been times throughout the season where the corners have gotten beat. Do I think the corners will do well against USC and hang in there? Yeah, I think they'll make some plays. but they're also going to get gashed at time because that's what the best offenses do is you get them once, they get you once. It's kind of the back and forth and how it goes. So I did think it was interesting that he defended his defensive back so tenaciously because they will need to play some of their best games of the season if Utah wants to continue to win with their offense being hampered by the absence of Cam Rising. And speaking of Cam Rising, Coach Whitt alluded on their absence or elaborated, on their absence a little bit, talking about Cam and Brant Keithy and said they're just still waiting on the clearance. And he was asked about redshirting both of them. And he said that would be a possibility. And with the medical redshirt rules, he does feel like they would be able to easily get that. So then the question becomes, would Cam and Brant want to return to Utah football? I think before NIL, there's no way, but now that you can just get compensated that way. Also, if they don't play this year, I'm not sure what the draft stock will be. NFL teams will be very curious about their medical. And, after you suffer serious injuries like those guys have, that can change your athleticism. That's just the truth and what NFL teams are going to be worried about. So I could see both Brant and Cam coming back for another year as crazy as it would be. I think it is a possibility. How likely? Not sure, but definitely not ruling it out. Also, going back to other things that he mentioned, he was asked about the absence of Nate Johnson, said that they did like the Wildcat package with Sione Vaki a little bit more. Hard not to see why after the way Sione Vaki looked, but it is interesting we didn't see any Nate just because the problems he can present as such an athletic running quarterback who can also make some throws for you too. He's not the most accurate quarterback as we know and we've seen throughout the season, but he is a quarterback and has completed passes for Utah in key moments still throughout the season, especially against Baylor, of course. So I was surprised. I'd like to see a little bit of Nate against USC just to get a different look, but I totally understand if they just want to roll with Vaki because, look, obviously with him in there, the Utah offense did some incredible things against Cal. So that will be fun to see as well. And they did, Whitt did say that, look, Sione, the absence of Cole Bishop in the first half is not going to impact the amount of snaps we see Sione Vaki because you're talking about having guys like Teo Johnson and there's other safeties in the depth room. But I truly believe whenever Sione needs a break on offense, it'll be Teo Johnson at free safety, Nate Ritchie at strong safety. And that's where the corner depth for Utah comes into play because you have Miles Battle, JT Broughton, and Zamiah Vaughn, all of whom in my opinion are good starting cornerbacks at the Pac-12 level. Also, if there's any USC fans who are still listening, and since I said Utah has a chance to shut down the USC offense, that's probably not very likely. I'm sure some will say this pass defense is worse. They're missing Clark Phillips. And in some ways that's true, but I would also say this in two things. Number one, the pass rush is better for Utah, which has made the pass defense also better because you have to cover and hold up as long. And Zamiah Vaughn, JT Broughton, to me, they're playing better than they did last year. And yes, Miles Battle, like just slotting it that way, like Miles Battle's not Clark Phillips, but Miles Battle's still a very good corner number 3 for this Utah team. Teo Johnson's also giving them good snaps. Cole Bishop's playing his best football ever. I do think Sione Vaki is an upgrade over RJ Hubert, so the secondary is better overall. And I can find multiple clips last season, as good as Clark Phillips was, and he was so good. He did get Jordan Addison got the best of his sometimes, just like it was Clark would get the best of him. So I do think this Utah defense will be fine without Clark Phillips in this matchup because obviously he's moved on and the other corners in place have played exceptionally well so far this season. Two final notes I thought were very interesting that Coach Whitt discussed. First one, he just talked about how Coley earned the center job for Utah and played well. He did play really well, I thought, as well on film. And he talked about he might be the strongest on the team. I don't know about you guys. That one definitely caught me off guard. I would have just assumed that was a Junior Tafuna, Samote Pepa, maybe even a guy like a Satawa Laumea. But credit for Coley for just obviously a guy who he's not been handed the starting job. He had to work for and earn it, and he's been working for and earned it in the weight room as well. So huge shout out to him. And speaking of the offensive line, Spencer Fowler did get a little banged up. Coach Whitt mentioned, and he did say that Tongi was the one who came, or excuse me, he did say Tongi came in and played pretty well against Cal. We know that he's the one who goes in when he gets hurt. And I agree. I thought he played well I thought it was Tongi's best game of the season because I've been critical of him and Spencer at times throughout the year. I thought he's looked better post-bye, which was what we thought might happen because of the Jim Harding factor. Last thing he did mention was just how well Connor O'Toole played, and you could see it was evident. He's not the best pass rusher on this team. I think Whitt would even probably take that back with how good Jonah Elliss has been, but he's a very good number 2, and he probably is the second best, slightly edging out Van Fillinger, even though Van was remarkable with the 2-sack game he just had recently too. But this Utah defense is deep, tying it the first segment to the second one now, And always interesting to hear from Coach Whitt. You can tell he's confident in his defense, even though they do have that tough task coming up. Because what did Coach Whitt say about Caleb Williams again? One of the most talented quarterbacks we've ever faced during my time at Utah. And I think he's absolutely right when you look at Caleb's ability to extend plays and deliver accurate throws outside the pocket. It's unlike anything I've ever seen in college football. I honestly believe that, just the level he does at. He's the college version of Patrick Mahomes. So Utah's got their work cut out for them taking on that offense, but they're going to be able to do it defensively. Unfortunately, in the first half, though, they'll be without the services of Cole Bishop, who his targeting penalty was not overturned. And we're going to be discussing the ramifications of that for Utah in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys about another one of our sponsors today in Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the most fun I've had, winning up to 25 times my money this football season. You just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and place your entry. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entries in less than 60 seconds. With Prize Picks reboot policy, your entries stay in place even if one of your players gets injured. For NFL games and college football top 25 matchups, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. Also, with Prize Picks, you guys can go to Prize Picks right now, and you can go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. So it's all caps, lowercase. Locked On College is the code. Once again, the code Locked On College for a first deposit match up to $100. Whether you guys think Saquon Barkley's in for a bounce back performance, Kirk Cousins going to make some plays on Monday Night Football against the 49ers. At least it's what I hope happens. Lots of daily great fantasy picks for you guys at Prize Picks. So once again, make sure you guys head over and go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Alrighty, closing this one out. Cole Bishop's targeting was not overturned. Really disappointing. I thought there was still, and I agree with Whitt, because Whitt's quote literally was him talking about how he was not happy. He didn't see how any of it happened, from the targeting call initially to it not being overturned on the field to it not being appealed even here. He called it a baffling decision. And I agree with him. I really think after watching it in a couple of the angles, I think you can clearly see that it's not targeting. I think when you look at the helmet placement by Cole Bishop and the fact that it's not going, he does use the body, uses the shoulder more so going into the Cal defender, Cal offensive player, of course, excuse me. I'm very disappointed that it wasn't overturned, but can't say I'm surprised, because we have seen the NCAA stick to their guns when it comes to this kind of stuff. So going to be tough for Utah to be without arguably their best defensive player, but what's nice is they're only going to be without him for a half. So Cole Bishop will come back in the second. I think Nate Ritchie's capable of holding it down during his absence. This might be one of, if not the worst time to be without Cole Bishop on the season, because of how potent the USC offense can be. Maybe you could say the Washington, maybe missing him for the first half against Washington would be worse with how good the Huskies look right now. But yeah, tough break for Utah. Nate Ritchie is starting to round into form. Had the sack last week. Has been making a couple other plays at times on the season. So I think Nate Ritchie's ready, and I think he's just going to blend right into the defense. I think he's going to get a sack in the first half. I think they'll bring a clever safety blitz, or maybe he'll act like he's a corner and come from the corner blitz more position. I'm excited to see Nate Ritchie get this opportunity, and I think he's going to look like the Nate Ritchie that played a lot of good football for Utah before the COVID season. So, during the COVID season and back into 2019 too, or it might have just been 2020 now. Off season JT would have known that, but in season JT forgot about Nate Ritchie a little bit until he's kind of started to heat up a little bit and get going again. So I just like the depth that Utah has at safety. I feel like they'll be okay without Cole Bishop. It is going to be very challenging not to have him, but that's where it's good to have depth. You're able to overcome the absence of some of your top players because you have not just this elite players backing him up, but really good college football players supporting and surrounding him in the secondary. So another challenge that Morgan Scallon's Utah defense has to take on, in addition to just the daunting task across the field that is the USC Trojans. I think Utah is capable of winning this game. We're going to be continuing to talk about that all week long on Locked On Utes. Tomorrow's episode will feature me talking about how I think Bryson Barnes and the Utah offense are going to fare against the USC defense after breaking down the Trojans tape against Notre Dame and looking at some of the other games throughout the season. That'll be on tomorrow's Locked On Utes. We'll see you then.